once the temperature heats up to above 15 degrees, so we're talking May, June time, that the virus gets into our local midges again and sets off. If we can have vaccinated animals before then, so much better. So although these BTV3 vaccines are not as protective as previous BTV vaccines, they're definitely much better than nothing. So they're suppressive, they will really limit it. And logically, people want to vaccinate their sheep because the sheep really, really suffer.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Fiona Lovatt to talk about the Bluetongue situation in the UK. Fiona gives us a description of the condition itself and explains the impact it can have on livestock in this episode. We discuss the spread in Europe and UK and the control measures that they've put in place to limit its impact and how they might work. We also discuss the role of vaccination and how it differs from previous serotypes encountered. Fiona, thank you very much for coming on and joining us. Maybe just for our listeners to start off, you might explain what the Bluetongue virus is, and I suppose the fact it's not new, but if you can give me a bit more background to it.
Yeah, so it's not new. We had BTV8 in the UK and back in 2007, 2008. We know we've had BTV1 and BTV4 in bits of Europe for the last, it's sort of we living with BTV. This is BTV3, which arrived in the Netherlands in early September last year. It's particularly aggressive and virulent. So they went from 4 cases in the first week of September last year to by Christmas, they'd had thousands of farms affected and they'd lost tens of thousands of sheep particularly, but cattle are less severely affected. And then they'd hoped that they would get a vaccine in place and get things under control for this season. But it's kicked off really badly again in both the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, really bad effects on the continent from this virus, I'm afraid.
So we'll be familiar with this terminology from COVID before. It's a slightly different strain of the virus, a more virulent strain of it?
Yes, so it's a different serotype, which means that we have to use a different vaccine. So BTV8 vaccine does not do anything for BTV3, so they had to make a whole new vaccine. And because it's really, whether it's because it's really virulent, whatever it is about it, the BTV3 vaccines are not as protective as the BTV8 ones were. So in the UK, back in 2008, we were all geared up for a really bad BTV8 outbreak, but because we vaccinated very, very thoroughly all over the southeast, farms, very thorough protection, it stopped BTV8 coming in. And in that same year in France, I think they had 70,000 cases. We didn't have that in the UK because we had so thoroughly vaccinated in the southeast. But it was a very protective vaccine. So we've now got these 3 BTV3 vaccines. The Dutch farmers were crying out for them. They were absolutely desperate for these vaccines. They got them in April. They vaccinated quite thoroughly. They definitely reduced clinical signs, and reduce the impact on farms, but they're not actually completely protective. So there is still spread. They still have animals getting infected in the Netherlands, just not having the same level of mortality as they previously had.
So to suppress the impact of it.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
What still is a great bonus if you're able to get that vaccine in, for what it can do. So.
Yeah, so in clinical signs, so cattle seem to get away with it. They're not nearly as badly affected as sheep. So you predominantly see lameness. For lameness is the first sign they see in cattle. Then red mucous membranes, crusting around the nose, ulceration in the mouth, and also discharge in the eye. But cattle those animals don't usually go on and die or have to be put to sleep. Whereas sheep, the picture's different. You get nasal discharge. I mean, it's called blue tongue because of this swelling. I wouldn't say look out for blue tongues, but think about that kind of inflammation around the face and the mouth, that swelling. So in sheep, you get nasal discharge, lethargy, tiredness, reluctant to move, again, oral ulcerations and crusting. And they're just really depressed, inappetent, and unable to breathe. So they're lying around. What they found in the Netherlands, they'd try and treat these sheep. They'd think they're getting through the worst bit, and then 2 weeks later, all their hooves slough off. So they end up putting them to sleep anyway. So sheep, they're really severely affected. Horrible.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like the impact on cattle, look, it has an impact on them, but on sheep, it is very, very severe. Like there's high mortality with it.
Yeah, so there's two things. We've currently got an impact survey going around in the UK because we're not getting reports back that it's as bad as it wasn't in Holland. So some of what I'm telling you is related to what they've seen in the Netherlands. There, last year, they reported they had detailed data from 60 farms, and they had mortalities of between 5 and 95% deaths in sheep and on each farm. So with an average of about 70, like horribly, horribly high. Now, they are much smaller farms than we have in the UK. And what we're seeing is not such high prevalent and total flock mortality, but the animals that have clinical signs, then that case fatality, in other words, death of an animal with clinical signs, a sheep with the clinical signs, is anywhere between 50 and 100%. So you're more likely to, if you're a sheep and you get BTV3, you're more likely to die than not die, if you see what I mean. That's bad.
Fiona, that brings us on to another point. In terms of time of infection, when it hit in the UK or started to spread relative to if it had come in earlier in the year, what impact can that have?
Yeah, so we saw it. We first diagnosed it this year in late August. We think it came into the country earlier in August as a midge blew in. A midge bites an animal, and within a week, the animal shows infectious signs. That infected animal has virus in its blood, and then a new uninfected midge bites it. That midge will pick it up, and then that infected midge can live for up to 6 weeks, and it will, every time it bites a cow or a sheep, it will pass on the virus. So the ruminants are multiplying the virus, and the midges are multiplying the virus, and the combination of the two. So if it arrives in the country on a midge very early in the year, then there's a big amount of a sort of big factory for virus. So you've got longer, like a hotter summer. All of that makes it worse. The fact we didn't get it till late August, and then we've sort of had some really cold spells. The midges stop flying. It has to be below 5 degrees, but the virus stops multiplying in the midge if it's anything below 12, 13 degrees. So the cool days are better, but then we still have to wait for the infected midges to die out. So even when we get to below 12 degrees, it will still go on for a bit longer.
So, and that's an important point. You highlighted the lag phase there is there. So I know at the moment you have restrictions in place on movement, and that has certainly an impact. We might discuss that a bit more, but it's not only the midge themselves moving, which they can independent of the animal, but you could potentially be moving an infected animal, not showing the clinical signs, and providing a fresh source for naive midges, for want of a better description, in a new area.
Yeah, so we've had it down in the southeast of the country. We currently have restrictions for pretty much half the eastern half of England is pretty much under restrictions. But where we've had odd outbreaks over on the west, some in Wales, some up in Yorkshire, Cumbria, that's because somebody has bought a cow or a sheep from over on the east, perfectly legally, moved it back before they were in restriction zones, and then it's become apparent that the animal they bought in good faith and was fine then goes down with Bluetongue, and then we panic when it's then it's in the west. We need to make sure those animals are culled before they infect the local midges, because it's a disease. It's not like foot and mouth, which is just spread animal to animal or fomites. It's this midge is really important. Once you've got it in the midges, then the ministry can the labs can trap 70,000 midges a day. Midges are that you might see one or two around. There are tens of thousands of midges. We haven't got a hope of controlling them.
Yeah. So probably just brings the current control measures. What has been in place over the summer and the autumn months in the UK?
So what they've done, they started off by killing out animals that were infected, hoping that we wouldn't get local infection. And we do have circulating virus, certainly in the east of the country. So there's no compensation, there's no culling. Vets can go, there's no restriction movements of people onto farms, but there are animal restrictions. So nobody's allowed to move animals out of those restricted zones. And those are increasing in size as new cases come along. And people have to apply for licenses to move stock around. So we've currently got an impact survey because we don't have a huge amount of data coming out of the cases in the UK. Our government vets collect data on day one, and then we have nothing after that. So we've got a voluntary impact survey asking farmers, please let us know how it is, so we can help you if you're badly infected, and so we can inform the rest of the country, how do we cope, what do we put in place. And what that impact survey is telling us is that farmers are being hurt by the movement restrictions. People who'd wanted to sell breeding rams can't sell them. That kind of, there is an economic impact of restrictions, but they're put there to try and protect the rest of the country. That the longer we can go through the year without it spreading, the better chance we have for protecting so far uninfected premises.
So it's basically trying to confine it to certain regions and limit its impact as much as possible.
Yeah. And things like, we have farmers in the west who might send sheep on tack over to the eastern countries for the winter. We don't want people to be sending sheep over there, either getting them stuck there or bringing disease back with them when they come back home to lamb. And we don't want people stuck with ewes in the wrong place at lambing time. The welfare implications of having animals in the wrong place is massive as well. We're in quite a hard place trying to deal with the disease as best we can.
Yeah, it has certainly an impact on the practicalities of farming life with it. Not easy, especially at the time of year it's kicking in it. I suppose, Fiona, the only upside, if we revert back to what you were saying about the temperature, that it requires a spread, and for the midges themselves, it really is cross fingers and pray for a cold winter. It could be the game changer we need to limit it.
Yeah, so Peter, we've been in meetings for the last year trying to prepare UK for this, and been really privileged to have Peter Merton. So he spent his entire career working on Bluetongue, various Bluetongues, and he will say it's always bad after a really hot summer. So thankfully, last summer was pretty miserable for us. Hopefully, that's given us a bit more time. And I very much doubt it will die off. We've got too much virus here now in the UK for it to die off over the winter, because there'll be some midges that they'll live for a certain length of time. It will harbour in animals. They pass vertically through the placenta, through the uterus, so that then calves and lambs could potentially be born infected. That will kick it off again. That's what happened last time.
One overlooked aspect of that is semen and embryos as well, that they could potentially be infected.
Yeah, and that was the reason. So France managed to clear BTB8, and then it kicked off again when somebody in good faith took some semen out of liquid nitrogen, inseminated an animal, and that's there once again. The virus has got it's nicely preserved in it. So yeah, I'm afraid we are slightly up against it because it's a really clever virus. But we can just do what we can do.
I'll circle back to where we started. In terms of flocks over there that are kind of preparing in a risk area, vaccination still has a huge role to play in the coming months, particularly as we head towards lambing.
Yeah, it does. Yes, so I'm most concerned about once the temperature heats up to above 15 degrees, so we're talking, May, June time, that the virus gets into our local midges again and sets off. If we can have vaccinated animals before then, so much better. So although these BTV3 vaccines are not as protective as previous BTV vaccines, they're definitely much better than nothing. So they're suppressive. They will really limit it. And logically, people want to vaccinate their sheep because the sheep really, really suffer. Actually, if you're being tactical, you'd vaccinate your cattle, because cattle are really big factories for the disease. So if you're a beef and a cattle and sheep farmer, I would recommend vaccinating your cattle, both, but your cattle are protecting your sheep, even though they've done a load of economic modelling. They did it for Scotland back for the last BTV outbreak. And although they found the impact is worse in sheep because of the clinical signs, milk drop in cows, that the biggest financial hit was because of the decrease in milk. So although a dairy cow might be able to fight the disease off, she's losing a good few litres a day. That has a massive financial impact to the farmer. So for that reason alone, vaccination is important. The companies who've brought the vaccines in, fair play to them. That we really need pharmaceutical companies to be making vaccines for us and bringing them in. I'm slightly concerned that the uptake is not going to be as much because people are a bit, well, they're not perfect, and no, they're not perfect, but they're the best chance you've got, basically.
But given the impact they can have on the flock, and it helps at that point, I think if it was a case where a flock had it and were vaccinated, we'd be damn glad they vaccinated.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I know. I've got quite a few colleagues through the European College in France and the Netherlands. Their farmers were so desperate to have the vaccine. When speaking with farmers who've been affected, it's heart-wrenching. It really is. And they would say, the French were furious that there wasn't actually enough vaccine. I would be gutted if we've brought vaccine into the UK and it doesn't get used because people are like, well, it might not happen to us. Well, we don't know how bad it is. Maybe we'll get away with it. I think with my stock, I would vaccinate in advance just to be sure. I suppose it's everyone's separate decision.
Fiona, look, really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you very much for that update.
No worries at all.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. Again, it's a disease we certainly don't want in this country, something to be very vigilant about. I have included a link in the show notes to Department of Agriculture's information page on it, where you'll find some useful background to it, description of the signs you need to look for and how you go about reporting it if there is any incidents and how you keep it out from your flock or herd. That's it for me. For updates from our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.